Okay, welcome everyone to our second Parents' Night. We open it up to the kids. We have some kids here because we're sort of focusing on the theme of growing up self-directed and what it's like to grow up here and then sort of transition into the next phase, college, work. And we have a growing teen population at the moment, so these questions are kind of in the air right now. And even for people with young kids here, I think it's often on people's minds, at some level. So we've invited Calvin Young Rice. And we have James Morningstar, who many of you probably know. He's on staff here. They both started in 2012 when they were part of the founding cohort of families. And they sort of took different paths. But they were here from the very beginning and sort of saw it evolve, and now it's a lot bigger, I think, than it ever was when you guys were here. James is working here. Calvin is working where you work? In Andover. Calvin found a job in Andover. So, I'm going to ask Calvin and James a few questions, and then we'll sort of have them talk, and then we'll open it up to questions from kids and parents. And then we want to leave plenty of time for parents, for all of you to just kind of socialize. You can talk to each other, talk to these guys, talk to me, talk to staff. That's always an important part of Parents' Night. So this is just a way to kind of get people thinking about self-directed education and how they might want to socialize and get the most out of the social aspect. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys some questions now. I have this long list of questions, and I don't think I'm probably going to get to all of them. But I wanted to start just by asking you guys kind of what it was like to be here in the early days, because I think a lot of new families that we get these days see the Maycomber Center more as providing the social component to an overall homeschool life, and that's great. We love that people use this in all different kinds of ways, but it's always been used from the beginning, at least by some families, as a complete, educational path in itself. And that's sort of where you guys come from. So I'm curious kind of how you saw, what role you saw Maycomber Center playing in your education. Yeah, does that make sense as a question?
Yeah.
Too general? Okay.
Do you want to go first, James?
Yeah. Well, to speak to the first part of what it was like being here early, it was very uncertain because the earliest memories of this place coming to be were around my family's dining room table. Everybody around there, in addition to our many children, just running around and nobody really having any set plan, and then finding this space and coming together to create the community we have now. I mean, this place has been probably the most essential to my education because it gave me a different perspective than most have about talking not just to peers but to staff, then to educators, and then sort of setting my own educational path and pursuing it and feeling totally in control of everything that I did because I directed it myself and have done so from day one.
So you felt like this was where your education sort of.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you do as you got older, maybe your last year, you started doing started taking some time off from here, doing some other stuff.
Yeah, I started studying for my high school equivalent, and I got that primarily to apply for jobs because it just made it easier than explaining what I was doing. Because they see that, and it's one box checked, and then you can just move on with your life. But yeah, towards the end of my time here, I did end up taking classes outside of the Maycomber community just to learn about subjects that I was interested in, and then focused on taking art lessons for 3 years, and that gradually coming to a head when I decided I wanted to go to art school. It was totally by me without any external input. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Calvin, do you want to say some stuff about your time here?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with pretty much what you said, but yeah, specifically thinking about the early days here, it was definitely really small compared to now. Just in general, it's very very few kids, but it was like exciting because it was so new and it had the center because it just formed. It wasn't really anything specific yet, so we were kind of forming what it was on the day to day. It's like, what do we want this to be? So that was cool going through that and like seeing how it changed over time, and sort of shaping what it was in a way. Yeah.
Did it sort of did it the way it took shape? Is that the way you kind of like? Did you guys have ideas in the beginning about how you wanted it to take shape in a different way, like more classes or more kids or more field trips?
Not specifically. I mean, maybe like some things like more field trips or really fun and great. So that's definitely one. But it's not like we went into it with a vision like, oh, this is what we want it to be. But just because the community was so small and it felt like it was a really small community, and just having that sort of responsibility of shaping it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I remember we had a couple of meetings. I don't remember if it was like one meeting or if I'm just kind of conflating them all into one, but I do remember like some intense conversations about kind of what we were going to do on a daily basis. Like, were we going to get people to come in and teach classes, or were you guys going to just kind of like decide how you'd spend your day? And were we going to have some kind of like system of some kind of judicial committee or like or some way of doing nonviolent communication? Were we going to vote on hiring staff, all that stuff? And I'm always appreciative that we took the minimalist approach. Do you guys remember that?
Yeah.
All of that? Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt like we were integral to forming the base for all of that. And taking the minimalist approach allowed us a lot more flexibility to incorporate whatever systems needed to be incorporated to make this run smoothly, especially with classes and activities, and just generally being able to put those ideas forward in forming an institution like this made it able to accommodate everybody and everybody's wishes and everybody's interests, so long as they had the drive to pursue it.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember many classes?
Classes, yes. I remember that, in the early days. It was.
I feel like we experimented more with classes in those days,
Mm-hmm.
and there's still classes here and there as they come up, the community here, but we were sort of like throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks and
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything in particular? Yeah.
French class with Denise.
Yeah,
That was
French
fun.
and Latin.
Yeah, and this Taekwondo with Silas.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Taekwondo.
Yeah.
Read Berlin with Amy.
Mm-hmm.
Talk history of important things.
James remembered that. Yeah.
The biochemistry class we did with James. That's what
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that experience actually with the biochemistry with James? How that came about
Yeah,
and
I
how
guess.
it went?
Yeah, I guess my how I think of it is kind of weird. Like being that another student here, member here at the time. Older kids, we'd taken a lot of classes, but we were sort of interested in the idea of what like regular high schools and stuff were like, but not necessarily enough to leave the center of like high school for a year. Didn't want to do that, but yeah, I wanted to see what it's like to take like a more traditional class like biology or chemistry. And we also said like we wanted to see what it was like to get tested and stuff like that. So we asked James like, hey, can you teach us a hard science class? He's like, yeah, it'll be really hard. Yeah, and he taught us biochemistry. I definitely learned like some things that ended up like going to college like a few years later instead of high school. And it was a fun class. It was definitely hard. It was like only 10 minutes of all the tests to write a bunch of stuff.
So did either of you ever start to feel as you got older like maybe you needed to do more structured stuff or go to public school to prepare for a college or anything like that?
Not really. I mean, I ended up wanting it, which is why I started pursuing like art classes. But even that sort of ended up just like I ended up steering my own ship in any of those things, and most teachers did not know what to do with me. So it was, it was a desire that never actually was fulfilled because I always had the I always wanted to be the one directing what I was learning.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and never really wanting to have any of that same structure of public school. I never envied that at all. And I never even felt like I needed to do any college prep work per se, because going to art school was just, I was like, okay, so what do I have to do now? There was never any prepare and then go. It was, what do I have to do now in the moment to do my application?
Mm-hmm. And when you got to college, was the fact that it was so traditional and structured in that way, the academics, was that a shock to your system?
No, it wasn't, because one thing about being here, and I had a good conversation with a past member who's currently in college about this same thing, was that the communication difference that I had with my professors, because of my interactions with staff and because of authority figures that were here, made it so I could advocate for myself in a way that they were very receptive to, and they wanted for me to learn the way I wanted to learn, because they respected that, and because they enjoyed seeing people who were self-directed.
What about you, Calvin? Can you talk a little bit about your transition from here to college, like the preparation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for your original question, I never really felt like the need to start taking any particular type of class or any pressure to do that. I guess when I was a little bit older, maybe 16, 17, I did start, I was just interested in a lot of things like that, so I started taking some more classes like that. And then, for college, I guess it was was ready to leave the summer. I decided I wanted to try engineering, so I don't think I did anything other than studying for the SATs with Dan here to just prepare for that. Other than that, I think I was just doing whatever I was interested in. but then yeah, I applied to a wide range of colleges. Some of them probably looked at like my transcript and were like, "What is this?" and spit it out. But then some of them actually looked, and I guess I went to RPI, and that was a good experience for me. I think.
Can everyone hear okay?
I'm having trouble hearing. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I'll try to-
Maybe just turn back. Yeah. Also, you can. Yeah. Yeah, and then in college, how did you do kind of hitting the ground with all, heavy academic load coming from here?
It was definitely different going to like, I guess, a fairly traditional college, engineering college, where you get to build your schedule, but still you have a set schedule and like full day of classes. It took some getting used to, but it wasn't bad. I guess it was really different. So, but it was kind of exciting because I was like kind of looking forward to trying something new like that.
We had a visit a few weeks ago from a group of kids who were also here in the early days, the Dotans and some of their friends, and they were talking about their experience now in college and the kind of frustration with their peers. I think it's fair to say they were expressing a lot of frustration with their peers if they got paired with someone doing a project or something. Like the people they were paired with were often just sort of trying to do the minimal amount of work to like pass, or and they felt sort of like they weren't really collaborating with somebody, and sort of like they took the whole thing a little bit more seriously than on average than the other kids in the class. Have you noticed that? Did you guys notice that kind of thing in college? Having coming from this kind of environment, that resonated for me because I definitely, at Tufts, I saw a lot of kids like coming in their sweatpants and slippers chewing bubble gum, and I just remember being incensed. Like, do you guys know where we are? Like, what kind of opportunity this is? Maybe you didn't get quite as triggered as me, but
Those are my exact thoughts.
did you have?
Offers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not. I mean, it was like what always came to mind was like you don't seem like you want to be here, and a lot of them probably didn't want to be there. This was just the path that they had been set on, and was what they followed without question. And I always just ended up going to the professors, because this was the other thing, and pointing out who wasn't doing their work. You would hate to have class with me. And I bulldozed them pretty much. So, but I have ended up like not having to do group assignments, and it was great. Once I sufficiently had advocated for myself. So, yeah, but it was a lot of the difference in attitude was staggering. It was like not showing up to classes on time, not notifying the professor if you're not going to be there. Like, all of this just like disregard, I think, comes back to the attitude they had towards their professors, probably in high school. How they thought about missing high school, missing a day of classes, missing anything, and just sort of like not caring because you got the grade. That never resonated with me because I never had to just get the grade. I did that once in class, and after the class was finished, I was like, I didn't gain anything from this experience. Why did I do it? I ended up taking another class that I didn't need to take just because I wanted to gain something while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But I never understood the people who didn't seem like they wanted to be there, but, come to think, it probably was them not wanting to be there.
Yeah, I'd agree with both of that. I had similar experience. I wouldn't say I thought about it all the time, that it bothered me too much, but I definitely noticed that a lot of people had a very different mindset about it than me, where it's like, yeah, I felt like I had the option of going to college, which was nice, and I chose to go, and I wanted to be there, who wanted to learn. But some people I met definitely seemed like they were just going through the steps to complete the class and weren't really focused on learning. Like, I guess I was kind of frustrated with some classes that had, I guess most classes have like mandatory homework, and I guess that's like normal, but sometimes it was kind of annoying because if I had already understood it, then I was like, this is a waste of time, or sometimes it would just be really difficult to finish and get the answer they wanted. And then there was a couple of classes that had like optional homework, which I thought was really great, and I could do sort of as much as I needed to help me learn what I was there for, and I thought it was great. But then like some of my classmates would just not do the optional homework, and I was like, it was like interesting. That was just like an example of like, wow, to me that is optional, doesn't really matter as much, but I can see that for other people it's like, oh, this is why they make homework mandatory. Perfect grades, but everyone doesn't homework.
So why is it that growing up in a place, I mean, we talked a little bit about the classes, some of the classes that you guys did, but like truthfully, mostly what I remember you guys doing is sitting around all day playing games outside. I mean, sitting around in a good way, like having fun with talking with your friends, playing a lot of capture the flag, ultimate frisbee. How is it that like growing up in a place where that's kind of the ethos, that you guys end up both choosing to go to college and embracing a very traditional educational system?
I think that it's like it all just comes down to the freedom to choose. Like, we chose to spend our days like this. We had the option to go and do other things. I knew that I could pursue whatever I wanted to in terms of like going to take other classes or going to, going and spending the majority of my day playing music or doing art or playing capture the flag or hanging out with people or going to the power lines or whatever it was. It was that freedom that motivated me to want to learn and learn more, and then realize that I don't learn very well outside of a very structured setting, and then going into those structured settings, entirely being my choice, was what drove me there.
Yeah, I guess, big thing about like how I spent my time here at the center was like, it was a lot of just doing things that were fun that I enjoyed, games, like outside or whatever. But I think one like really important aspect of it that helped me going into college was that I was used to choosing how to spend my time, and yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for like what other high school is like, but like I think normally going into high school, going into college, it's a much more, your schedule is a lot more open in college. So that takes some getting used to, but for us, or for me, it was going the other way, where I'm used to having a completely open schedule, having to choose how I spend my time all the time, and then going into college, which is somewhat structured, you still need to manage your time in a certain way. And then just what Jane said about having chosen to want to be there, it's really makes a difference versus feeling like it's something you have to do in terms of how motivated you are.
Okay, well, I don't know, we could go in different directions from here, or we could, I don't know, is there anything else you want to say about this conversation we're having, or do you want to just open it up to questions and answers? This sort of thing can go by very fast. I'm going to leave like half an hour or so for audience, so that's good. Okay. And teens, you should ask questions.
I have a question. Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. How important was music in the earliest days of the center?
It was probably one of the hardest things to get started, but it was always something we wanted. We had an upright piano. We had, I don't really remember a ton of like what we had because, you know, getting the entire place set up and being here was the first hurdle. And then it sort of like evolved from there. Dan got involved, Mark got involved, and we started getting more and more music equipment going. And then leading up to our first show, it definitely was extremely important, but it wasn't the easiest to get started. So,
Yeah, I kind of forgot how. I forgot that like at the very beginning we didn't have any like that many instruments and stuff.
we
but
didn't have that room.
Yeah,
That was a concrete slab.
yeah. The music room was like such a great addition, and I think it was just because a lot of us had done like school music shows before and liked music. It was really important to like at least over half the kids like enjoyed playing music and wanted to have a music show. So that was really great that we could get that going, and I think it's a really great addition to this type of space and community. It's like a music room and playing music together. It's a really nice activity.
So I want to follow up on something that you, both of you said, but you particularly talked about the fact that like you really wanted to go outside and get sort of more specialized classes. And it seems like both of you felt like maybe when you were around 16 or something like that, that you felt like, okay, I think I know what I want to sort of study. And you also talked about the fact that you feel like you've gotten everything that you needed up until that point in terms of, you know, academics, right? What we call about academic knowledge. Because it didn't seem to me like you needed to take a lot of extra classes to get into college. So do you feel that it would have been different if maybe those kinds of classes that you took were brought here, or if you had them here in the structure that was here, the lack of structure? There is structure, but it appears like it's not. But it's choice, right? So how do you see that would have been different, better, worse? Do you feel that it was much more important to actually go out, sort of see what the rest of the world is doing in terms of knowledge, right, and education, and sort of get in line with that to help you with your goals? So it's like a two-pronged kind of question.
Do you want to-
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think it was part of the experience was going out somewhere else. Like there were a couple classes I took Harvard Extension School that were. It was cool because it was totally unrelated to. It was just like getting to see a completely new thing versus if it was here, it would be like just another class here. That's not to say that's a bad thing. I think it would be convenient if it was here, and yeah, I don't know. I don't think I could really say it's one way or the other. It's going to be better.
No, I think it was a question of difference more than anything. Because I couldn't experience the things that I did taking art lessons in a space like this because it needed to be more intimate. It needed to be more, it needed to be different. It was like, yes, I was self-directed in that. I was showing my artwork and showing the direction I wanted to go. But I didn't have the resources and I didn't have the tools available to me. And I don't think that introducing them into this environment, they would have been as beneficial in a lot of ways. And I did most of my learning in regards to art at Keith Tech, during taking night classes, and at Hopkins Center for the Arts, doing private art lessons. And, you know, doing stuff at Keith Tech ended up with me helping that artist in her studio, and then helping at the Halston Mills, doing like work during their annual art sale. And then the work at Hopkins Center for the Arts ended up with me volunteering and helping them with figure drawing and setting up supplies and eventually getting involved making costumes for plays. That structured environment that they had going over there was the only reason that I could do a lot of these things. If it were to be brought here, I don't know if it would have had the same impact. And we did have Mihoko, I think Wakabayashi is her last name, but she was a weaver that we had in here. And her work was really immensely beneficial. I ended up doing an internship with her for college. And it was amazing, but I wonder if those same things, like the experience they had at Keep Tech and Huffman Center for the Arts, if they were brought here, if I would have ended up utilizing them later in life versus the benefit they brought in the immediate term.
Yeah, those are great insights. Can I do a follow-up? So what would you think about the center then maybe venturing out and forming some kind of partnerships with various institutions or programs that are outside so that either they come and do presentations here about what they can offer, and you talked about how you like field trips, so that would be an opportunity for field trips, right? So what do you feel about that? Would that be a bit more beneficial than what you said? And I totally get your argument about bringing it here being different.
Yeah, I think it would be great. Like, it's sort of best of both worlds. You help kids who are interested get an avenue to doing it, and then still, if they want to go somewhere else to do the class in that partnership with another school, whatever exactly it is, then they still have that opportunity and get to see a whole other side of things. So I think it'd be great.
Yeah, and we did. There were a few instances where things like that did happen. Where, like, again, talking about Mihoko, she came here and did her little weaving intro, and then we took a field trip to her studio and got to weave there. We also did. We've taken field trips to Mass Art, which is where I ended up going to school. So that was a great thing. But I can only see benefit to forming connections and partnerships with other institutions and trying to find that balance for everybody here. Like, do they do best when things are involved in this structure, or do they do best in, being here as sort of the launch pad and then getting sent to other places and testing out the methods that people learn best? Yeah.
Yes, Lane.
I have a question for both of y'all about kind of that transition between being here and being, because you both went to college. And how did that transition work? So it sounds like you were studying for doing the SAT while you were still here, and then did you go to college the next fall?
I did, yeah.
You did. So it's kind of a traditional apply to college, like what would be your last year, and then launched off to college.
Yeah, and a lot of people, it was common for a lot of people to take a gap year, and I think that's great, but I just didn't have anything in particular that I wanted to do in a gap year, and I felt like I was ready to, I was excited to try college. It was like, okay, yeah, I can do it now. I'm trying to do it now.
And then James, did you, these classes that you were taking at UTech, was that post, like in between, did you go straight to Mass Art? Like, kind of what was that transition from here to there for you?
Well, the classes at Keep Tech and everything I did at HCA was, Keep Tech was more during my time here, and then HCA was after. But I didn't go to college until I was 21. I was working for the majority of the time, which is why I got my high school equivalent for ease of applying to jobs. And then when I was thinking about going to college, one of the first things that popped up was like finances, because my family was very conscious about, student loans and how if you don't enjoy what you're going to do, you're going to be saddled with debt. So that was a huge motivating factor for me in that. But that transition was much longer. So I worked from 18 to 21 and then started going to college. That was what I did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but the one that I'm most interested in, I think, is can you talk a little bit about like what sparked your interest in your various pursuits? How much of that was something that you felt like was just really internal, and how much of it was sort of pinging off of your peers here, and how much did your peers influence your the development and path of your interests?
Yeah, for me, I guess math and physics was kind of two things that I always was kind of interested in. My parents were just like mathematicians, and they talked to me about math sometimes, and like I watched a lot of physics YouTube videos that I thought were really cool. So it was mostly just something I was interested in. As for peers, I would say, I think I already mentioned my friend Ben, who's a member here, who like moved on from the center the same year as me, and we did a lot of things together, and definitely influenced each other a lot. And in terms of the like more STEMmy sides of pursuits, we definitely like did that together, and it was nice having someone else who was interested in that.
Yeah. My interest in art was pretty much completely self-motivated. I didn't have any artistic influence coming from my family or any of the environment in there. And I, even here at the center, there wasn't a real group of kids who was doing a lot of like art that I wanted to do, like illustration, concept art, exploring different mediums, that kind of thing. So it was, and that also came with being, actively discouraged in a lot of ways from pursuing art. So it was sort of entirely self-motivated and a little bit rebellious almost, because I was like, well, I'm going to do it anyway because I want to. And I'm self-directed, and myself is being directed that way. So, yeah.
Earlier, you both said that being self-directed was very foundational and how it affected you when you went into college and when you went from here. How much of that is 2020 hindsight? And what I mean by that is, when you entered this next phase, how much did you feel advantaged because of all these things that you're talking about now very clearly? And how much did you feel disadvantaged because that's probably how the world made you feel, like at the time?
Yeah.
I personally never felt really disadvantaged in like a significant way because of it. I mean, there were definitely there's certain topics like topics that they taught in school, history, that I was never that interested in, that other people would just know a lot more about than me, and I would notice that, but it was never too much of a problem for me. In college, it wasn't like I thought it was a huge advantage, because I went to the self-directed learning, I'm miles ahead, I can manage my time and do whatever I want. It didn't really feel like that either. I guess I will say, it's already talking about after college, going into the workplace, from my personal experience as an engineer, I thought it was very much managing your own time and managing your own tasks. I think is really, really important, and it can be kind of difficult, and I definitely felt like that was something where being used to managing my own time helped me in a significant way.
I think it was, how much of it was hindsight and how much of it was, beneficial in the moment. It was very, very strange because I did not know the majority of the things that other people did. And there were a lot of assumptions that were made by professors that certainly felt strange to ask in the moment. Like they said, everybody knows how to do an outline of an essay. And I would say, what does that mean? And I think it was an advantage in the long run. Certainly in the moment, I had no idea what was going on. And it was in a lot of stress being in that position and not knowing things. But I think that it was a benefit, really, because it was not just beneficial for me to advocate for myself and say, what do you mean? I don't know what that is. Please tell me what that is. But also to challenge professors and to have them say, oh, wait, okay, that's an assumption that I had that does not go challenged very often. And I think that it was good. And, hindsight is 2020, but I think in the moment, it was only my self-directed nature that really carried my way through it, because I ended up inspiring a lot of professors by saying like, this is the way I want to take this assignment. I want to tie this assignment in with this other class that I'm taking, and combining all these things and doing things in unexpected ways that they actually really resonated with.
I just want to second that. I think like definitely being used to having a relationship with like the staff at the center where it's you sort of see each other as equals and you're not just used to having people tell you what to do, I think is really healthy for learning from a professor, being able to ask the right questions, not being afraid to question things. I think that's a big benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you guys talk about what you did before you came to Maine? Because you were partially formed human beings when you started here. So I'm curious, as somebody, a mother of a 6-year-old here, what those earlier years look like for you each.
Mm-hmm.
We both went to Sudbury Valley. I guess me from when I was like 4.5 until I was 12, and then went to Wakefield Center. It's
I was threatened with public school. I didn't want to go. I didn't really want to go anywhere. I wanted to stay home. But then I was 8 or 9 when my mother said, "You have to find something to do, or else you're going to school." And I said, "Okay, I'll go to Sudbury Valley." There you go. That's what I did. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Sudbury Valley, at least in terms of their educational philosophy, is basically identical to this. It's in practice, it ends up looking a little bit different, and we're a different place and different people. But so again, like a totally non-traditional.
I have a question. I don't know if Sudbury Valley still has the same structure as all like 5 books I read about Sudbury Valley. But my understanding is that there's like these democratic meetings where the kids take place and said things. And if it's still like that, or if it was like that, why did you decide when you were setting up the structure not to do that and to go minimalist? Because you were part of those like
Love
meetings,
that.
right?
That's like my favorite thing to talk about. Right? You guys.
Well, you got to be part of the meetings, and I'm wondering like, why is it that you were like, oh, don't want to do that?
I think that part of it was that a lot of the actions at Sudbury Valley, a lot of the ways that the structures were already set up, you didn't feel like there was much impact you had. There were a lot of conflicting power structures in that organization that made it very difficult to feel like you had a lot of control or you had a lot of impact or you could change the way things were going. So yes, it was democratic, but I think that it was a system that was not designed with that flexibility, the flexibility that we have here in mind. Now we still have meetings, and anybody can challenge anything and bring anything to the table. And I like being staff now, hearing the things that little kids say that really sometimes shake the foundation of what we have going here. I think is a benefit of avoiding that, like the structure of every Thursday at 2 p.m. is school meeting, you have to sit there and you have to be quiet, and it's Robert's Rules of Order, and if you don't understand anything, don't say anything. And there were a lot of like unspoken rules that made that structure way less appealing, at least now looking back on it today.
What are some of the things the little kids say that shape your structure here?
Now I'm called on it, I can't.
You can answer. Or,
About the first
Oh.
one, yeah.
I feel like you said it really, really well. I pretty much agree with that. Like here, even though we didn't have a school meeting set up that was running the school the same way Sudbury Valley did, we sort of had meetings where kids got to say like how they wanted to shape things, and I felt like I had a lot more influence in shaping what I got to do with my time and like shaping the school here than I ever did at Sudbury Valley. Part of that could be because I was older here, but Sudbury Valley, I think it's really set up in a way that it is like seems very democratic, but the kids don't end up having as much influence as it seems like they would, or as much as they do here in some ways. And in the ways that matter, I felt like I really got to influence here.
So you're saying like that like, so in my head, it sounds like you're saying that adult version of what an idealistic democratic school would be when you're living it, it didn't feel as democratic as this. This feels more democratic and more flexible, and kids can really voice, because they don't have to sit there, and they can just spontaneously share. Is that?
To me, yeah. I feel that way, I think.
I think so too. Everybody is actively encouraged and reminded anytime community meetings take place that they are able to call one and that they are able to say, the thing that is bothering them, and that they have the ear of everybody in the community.
Even when a young child raises their hand and floors everybody with a complete non sequitur, we all still go,
We'll
thank you, Emma, that's really... We'll take that under advisement.
So is there follow through to that? Are you taking it under advisement?
I mean, we absorb it, let it sink in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will figure out who pushed your sled down the hill and why there were no tracks next to it. Trust. We will.
So you guys said that you feel like you were involved here. So you feel like you made an impact. Do you feel like you made an impact on the culture of the center, on other members, on staff, on the parents, everything? And how? Like if you can think of a specific example, like, okay, I had this idea and this was implemented. And I felt really good. Or somebody said something and then we formed this policy where it was this, how do you shape culture here as an equal member, right? Because you're not seen as a child, you're seen as a member, as an equal.
I think one thing just like socially structured, like one of the things that we did when we first started was like exploring the woods and going out and setting landmarks and seeing all the things that were there. It was myself, Calvin, and Martin Dickey who popularized going to the power lines. That was, the beginning of that. Yeah, I don't know if anything comes up for you.
Yeah, it's hard to say specifics. I definitely feel like yes to pretty much all of it. I think it's largely a cultural thing. I mean, there's specifics, I guess, are certain classes that we started, or not necessarily classes, but activities. Like 1 year we decided to try making maple syrup, and then I'm pretty sure we still do that every year. And things like that. I don't think that's the only thing, but that's something specific that I can point to and say here's a clear thing, where it's sort of just whatever the kids were interested in, that's what we did, and it's a good thing for this type of place if it continues on.
Were there any discussions that you feel were really difficult to have, or very pointy, or very passionate? And I just said that to investigate the, and conflicts. How was that dealt with? And how do you feel it's, I guess you can look at and compare, right? How do you feel that this is dealt with here? You can compare it to Sudbury Valley and maybe to the rest of the world.
Sudbury Valley's way of dealing with things was through the Judiciary Committee. So there was very much an element of you have done something wrong. There is a complaint written against you if you were taken to JC and you were served a sentence. Here, when we first started talking, I remember when we first started talking about nonviolent communication as our method of dealing with these problems. Originally, I was kind of what the hell does that mean? We're just going to sit around and talk about these things? Why don't I just go change all the trash cans and then I can, return, be on my merry way? But
that was a common sentence that was still
yes, it was. Yeah, there was one sentence I had was for 2 weeks to change all the trash cans around the school. That was one of the very sentences you got. Or once I got restricted from the back of the school where the pond was for 2 weeks. Like this was sort of the retributive justice system that they have there, even though it was like not equal punishment for equal measure. But now, with nonviolent communication, actually talking through the situations that come up, it is a lot more substantial, and it actually like you actually see people not doing the things that got them in the conflict in the first place, versus Sudbury Valley, where I found a lot of like offenses would just be repeated over and over and over again. Like you could find it in the like books of complaints, like it was just the same person coming up doing the same thing and not learning from their mistakes because they really didn't unpack why there was a mistake in the first place with what they were doing. So, does that answer your question? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So if you guys could go back in time and we're 12 again, 12, 13 years old and coming to Maycomber, what would you do differently? What would you like to do given the way things are now as opposed to back then?
I would probably say the only thing is that maybe try to get a bigger base of members to start with. That would be the only thing, because some days we did get sick of each other, and that's sort of why we started going to the Power Lights, was, you know, a necessary amount of separation from certain social groups. But aside from that, I mean, I think that the situation unfolded so beautifully that it's not really, you know, I try not to consider a lot of the what ifs, sort of, yeah.
Yeah, I think my only like regret, I guess. I mean, I don't really have any regrets about it. There's not much I would change. I do wish we had a larger community at the time, and like particularly when I was 16, 17, there weren't as many older kids. I was like 3 other kids really close to my age, maybe. And I do wish there was a larger community and more people my age at the time. It didn't feel like there was something I didn't know what to do about that. But other than that, I don't think there's anything really fundamental I would change.
Yes.
So you mentioned, for example, not knowing how why paragraph essay or whatever. Which anyway, was there anything significant that you were not taught that you wish that you had that actually did make an impact, that did hold you back, or caused you a delay, or missed opportunity, or anything like that?
Not really, to be honest with you. I mean, the only thing, like, there's only, like, some certain things that made me feel self-conscious more than anything. There was, like, certain references I didn't understand, certain topics that everybody seemed to know about, but a lot of it was, like, the only regret, or the only thing that really held me back, which in retrospect, I don't think actually did, was the sort of socialization that a lot of the kids were used to, and sort of like coming together and immediately forming a clique. And I, ended up forming my own clique with 3 other people who commuted, and we still talk to each other throughout, and we're still friends now. So, not really, because I just don't think it was, I don't think it would have stuck with me. And I also don't think that and it may just be an art school thing that made it easier, because a lot of it was more open in that way, and a lot of the professors were very receptive. But no, I can't really think of, one thing that really held me back that I didn't learn that a lot of other people did.
Yeah, since you mentioned writing essays a few questions ago, I do think that is one, the biggest sort of academic thing that I didn't have a lot of experience with coming from here. And definitely when I did have to write an essay, it wasn't just like everyone else. It's like, oh, it's just another essay, do the same thing. I'm like, oh, this is new. I need to learn how to do this. But I didn't feel like it held me back. Maybe slowed me down the first few times, but then I was still able to learn, and I don't think it really set me back in a significant way. And nothing else really that I felt like
Okay, Abby, then Carrie, then Lane.
But my
This is like a
follow-up-
Make-Number Center meeting. What?
This is a follow-up to that.
Okay,
Sorry,
you can
go
go.
ahead.
Yeah.
You talked about that when people were talking about things that everybody seemed to know you and you nodded your head. Like, how did you guys handle that? Like, in those situations, like, what did you do when that happened, or how did you handle that? I'm just curious.
I'm very used to being looked at like I'm very strange. You know, I did like a lot of things. Like, you know, not only was I from this self-directed learning community, I was also a chicken farmer, and I also like was making artwork that even in art school people were kind of like, oh, how interesting. But you know, dealing with it was always just a matter of like just calmly just putting myself out there and seeing what people were receptive and what they weren't. It was an exercise in, you know, vulnerability.
I think for me, just as it happened, like the first time I sort of realized that this was like, that like essays were like a specific thing that I really did a bunch of. I was like writing one with a friend. It was maybe only my second year in college where I really had to write a big one or something. And they were like, what are you doing? This is how you structure an essay. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. And so I sort of learned from them. And that was, I could have learned from someone else, but I happened to, and that was fine. I was still learning from my peers. And then after that, it's just a lot of practice. So.
I feel deeply compelled to say something at this point because this is such a common thing, and I also, this is not a night where I'm supposed to really talk too much about my experience, but I did also grow up in the same kind of atmosphere, and it's very common, and you know, I hear this anxiety from some of the teens here sometimes, and I think for me, I can just speak from my experience. It often felt like, you know, I grew up in a slightly parallel culture as my, you know, peers. If you're talking about in college or you're in your neighborhood, for example, the kids all go to public school and you hang out with them during the weekend. There are things they kind of know about that you don't really know about. But it's not like this essential knowledge that we think it is. You know, we have this idea of like the Western canon of essential knowledge, and that without that you're like crippled. I really don't think it's that way. I think it's more like, you know, I sometimes tease Carrie because anytime someone mentions a song or a movie from the 80s, she's like, it's like she spent the whole decade under a rock. I don't know where she was.
I was in school.
Oh, yeah. But you know, I don't think she feels inadequate because she didn't see those movies or. I hope.
I'm judging you right now.
I hope she doesn't feel inadequate. But we think of certain academic subjects, you know, in that way, like those are keys to a successful life, and I think they're really more like cultural references, and it doesn't take into account all the things that someone like Ben or Calvin or for myself as, I'm sorry, James, it doesn't take into account this whole, what's the word, what's it called when you personalize your car or your guitar? Customize. This whole customized body of knowledge that we've each created for ourselves that no one else shares. You know, nobody has exactly this canon of knowledge that I've created for myself, and no one would probably appreciate it as much as I do because I've cultivated them, you know, because it's meaningful and important to me.
I just want to point out that your example looking at men about the customization of the like stuff for cars, it's a clear example of like, oh, I'm thinking that men would know what I'm talking about. It's the same thing that you're talking about here. And I can follow up with my son who would transition from into 8th grade. In 8th grade, he chose to go to public school. And so that was one of the main sort of concerns or issues that he had going in. It's like, I don't have the reference. These guys are talking about this and that, and or these video games. I didn't have that, and so, but then he figured it out, and then he continues. He won't necessarily be able to speak to that, but I see it. He's using all the self-directed sort of tools. Thank you, that he had from Sudbury Valley and from here, from basically from 2nd grade to 8th grade, and he's using it in high school right now in a public high school, and he's not as stressed out about the classes, and he can see that, yeah, you know, I'm just focusing, I'm doing the work, and then I have free time, and the most important thing is to socialize, and I'm learning about this new culture that I knew nothing about this way.
And it's a beautiful thing, Carrie's cultural amnesia, because I get to watch all those things again with her and show her again. Like, look at this movie I found, it's great.
Abby, I think you're right.
Oh, I think my question is.
Okay. And Carrie, did you have a question?
No, it was more just I wanted to say Anya, who was here, was a member last year and moved on to college this year. They were back visiting us last week and was speaking to this, you know, this, because we were asking if they felt they were missing anything or lacked any information, or I think Anya had taken a few college classes. But they said they looked at their peers in college and were like, what were you doing for the last 12 years? They didn't feel like the peers had any more knowledge, more information than they did. Like, yeah, Anya feels like she was totally on par with them and wasn't lacking information. There were a few of those, like, what is a paragraph sort of things, and said that they dealt with it just by asking the question, but had gone in and proactively dealt with it by going in proactively and talking to the professor initially, being like, hi, I'm Anya, this is who I am. So felt like they already had a relationship with the professor, and so when those questions came up, it was no big deal.
I want to add that when my son went into 8th grade, in 2nd grade, he had an IEP. And he went in, no IEP, no 504, and he had A's and B's, and he had no problem. And there was no clear curriculum taught to him from 2nd grade to 8th. In 7th grade, he wanted to do curriculum at home, so I wanted to do it. He did a lot of math with Dan here, just because he wanted to. And he didn't have any problems. And then he was anxious. He thought, what if I don't know all the stuff that these guys know? And then he realized, I actually know more than they do. Plus, he wanted to be there because he chose to go. And those guys were like, oh, we have to be here. And so for the most part, so in 8th grade, he was asking the same questions that you guys were asking me in college. Like, what the heck?
Mm-hmm.
Seriously?
We have time for one last question, and then people can have snacks, decaf coffee, and mingle. Well, let's just. Oh, go ahead.
This goes back to something you guys were talking about the small cohort, and I'm wondering what it implies for this. Like, do you feel like you have friends from your time here that you have now that you met here?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is like I still talk to Martin. Like, we still play games together. And I mean, when Calvin was living in California for quite some time, so we didn't connect very much there, but it's like, you know, the connections that we made here to the group that was first here. And I had a bit of an unfair advantage because 6 of the founding members were my siblings. So, you know, it was like, I do still talk to them. Yeah.
Oh, and I was very touched actually this past month when this group of kids, there were 6 or 8 of them came together, and this is what they do. You know, they're in college all over the country, but when they come home, like for the holidays, they get together. You know, they get together, go to each other's houses, and then they come here and visit us. So they seem to be very tightly, you know, almost more familial in a way.
Yeah, there's only a couple, like maybe a couple people I talk to on a regular basis, like very often, but it's always like me and James, even though we were very close friends in the center, I moved off to California. We weren't that close for a while, but then like I ran into him at the airport the other month, and then we like talked to each other for half an hour, you know, and it's like I still feel very connected to like people I knew here, and one of my best friends I met here, or not in here, but I knew going through here, and still very, very close friends with him. And then even another person who's like left the center when we were younger, just got to move back to Japan, but then later I found out he's living in California, and we're moving an hour away from being connected again, and we're just one of my closest friends there. So I definitely feel like the connections I made here are very strong.
I wanted to answer a quick question about what the little child says that shakes the foundations. There was one of the children, little ones, came up and said, "It's gonna be a good day." I said, "Why?" He said, "Love, friendship, things happening all around," and she trotted off. But it's like no truer words were ever spoken, right? And it made I still think about it. Look at that tattooed on me somewhere. But I mean, little kids say amazing things, but the teenagers do. Like they all do. There's no like they don't have the filter, or they don't have the concern to say things. And I hear it all the time, and I see it all the time. So even though we couldn't pick something, it's all foundational. Like we listen to everything, but they say amazing things all the time. So that was one. That's my favorite. I think I get that tattoo. That was
Okay, thank you very much for coming. Thank you all. So,
Yeah.
Nicely done.